We're super excited to bring another Whiskey Friday Academy to you guys. We're joined again by our good friend Ryan from Zebulon. For those of you that don't know, Ryan and Zebulon and Dundon have formed a partnership that has lasted a number of years at this point. It's been very successful for both of us. We both get a lot out of it, which is great. And at Dundon, it's good to know what you're really, really good at. It is also good to know what you don't know and when you need to call an expert in to do things for you that you can't do for yourself. And Ryan is 100% that expert. And we're very happy to be going through, at long last, the 992 GT3 RS aerodynamic secrets, if you will. And there's a lot of nuance in this car that Porsche brought to bear to take a street car and give it race car aerodynamics. And that's why bringing a race car aerodynamicist in to do the evaluation is so critical. So welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back and doing this again with you guys. This was a really interesting project. So typically our baselines aren't super involved. This one was quite a bit more because there's a lot going on here.
Mm-hmm.
We expected the results to be quite good because Porsche released some pretty great numbers on the car, and we've confirmed them. And it was really surprising to see how they managed the flow field around the car and how polished some of it really was. So yeah, we can get into it and see what we've got.
Yeah. So give everyone a little backstory. We've been trying to help our followers understand that this kind of effort is not necessarily something that happens in a day. This is stuff that takes concerted effort, right? The scanning of the car, the shaping of the CAD model from the scans that you create. We recently released a 5 to 8 minute video along those lines to kind of illustrate the amount of work it takes to do this. To do this, I'll use the word correctly. You have to have some confidence in the CAD modeling that you have, that it's accurate. It's accurately representing the car in real life. You have to have some confidence in the modeling, which there's an adage in modeling: garbage in, garbage out, right? So you have to have some level of ability to vet and or sanity check the model against real life. Now, we're not blessed to have an automotive wind tunnel at our disposal. So doing that with the actual car, potentially cost prohibitive and probably a whole rabbit hole we don't want to dive down, because I know the devil's in the details with doing that as well. The next best thing we can do is use a vetted, tested, corroborated CFD model that has been used on a number of projects and put forth our CAD model into that CFD modeling software to really figure out, do the baseline numbers that we get from the CFD modeling that Ryan's doing and what Porsche published, are we there? Do we get the same thing? So what say you, learned fellow?
So I mean, you're absolutely right, and you touched on a lot of points that are very important when we're doing work like this. There's a lot of ways to skin this cat as far as checking how this car is going to perform. CFD is what we use because it is the tools that are available to us. Like I said, we don't have the wind tunnel, but there's also just a countless number of ways to run CFD. And so our approach has been to simplify certain things that we find increase errors in the CFD outputs and don't affect the outputs very much as far as what our expectations were and what we actually measure in the real world. And so we call that a bluff body. That's the model that you're talking about. So we modeled a bluff body. And all of the surfaces that we are very concerned about or interested in, those have to be as accurate as possible, right? But there are certain things that we can assign a little bit less importance to,
Nominal
and
values kind of thing,
yeah,
right?
still get the outputs that we need. And so even with our bluff body simulations here, we're able to do a lot more simulation in a shorter amount of time. We are able to decrease our errors and still get the outputs that we expect.
That's
Well,
fantastic.
sometimes we don't expect them, but we
Yeah,
can trust them.
that's the beauty of why you have to do CFD, because there are things that happen in the nonlinearity of airflow and turbulence and other things that you can't do without some level of modeling, right? Navier-Stokes equations are pretty freaking complicated to try and just imagine in your head what can happen. So
Certainly, it's just like you said, junk in, junk out, and anything we can do to simplify so that we get good results, repeatable results. That's what we need. So these results that we got here, we ran multiple simulations in multiple different ways and got the results that we expected. So that was good.
awesome.
We saw very similar numbers to I don't know if they're published, but to what Porsche kind of says that this car is doing.
Right.
So we're getting around 680 pounds of downforce in this model at 100 miles an hour. The drag reduction system, we see a reduction in drag of 30.4%. And from what I have found, they were expecting a drag reduction of 30%. So we're right on there. And
Awesome.
It's pretty cool to see that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's an exciting place for us to start from, because that means that any improvements we make are going to be real, right? The data set, our measuring stick is both valid and calibrated at this point. So any improvements we make, either for drag reduction or more lift, downforce, et cetera, then yes, we're gonna. This is validating. So I'm fine to just follow you through the weeds in however you want to dissect all of the awesomeness that Porsche gave us to kind of take a look at.
Okay. Well, we don't have a ton of stuff that we were prepared to show right now, but there's definitely a lot that we can talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think everybody that's interested in this car is very familiar with a lot of the little aspects, all the little design aspects that Porsche has added.
Mm-hmm.
So we can start with the Strakes on the roof.
Yeah. So there's for those of you who might be tuning in because you're curious about the 992 G3 RS, are not super knowledgeable about it, maybe don't have one yourself, maybe aspirationally are looking to get one, or you're just tuning in to learn about aerodynamics, a roof strake is a guide to kind of help shape the air towards or away from something, sometimes to create a vortice or an air dam. And I'm speaking out of turn. I'm not the aerodynamicist, but these are things I've learned from Ryan. So I'm going to tell you how smart I am here for a second. The Strakes on the roof, there's a misnomer with the GT3 RS. And I don't know if this was subterfuge on Porsche's part or they're trying to make the car look smaller cross-sectionally. The 991.2 GT3 RS air intakes for the engine were on the side of the car.
Mm-hmm.
The air intakes on the 992 GT3 RS are in the deck lid, but there's still holes on the side of the car that don't go to the engine. So we'll leave that one for Ryan to talk about a little later, because I'm sure there's some fruit there.
There definitely. It's unrelated to this, but it's interesting nonetheless.
Yeah. So back to roof Strakes, just giving people a bit of background on what we're talking about before we dive super weedy. Typically,
when you see fins Strakes on the top of the trailing edge of the roof, right in front of the rear window, those are vortex generators. Lancer Evolutions were the first car to really put those into like a production car situation,
Mhm.
and they create vortices that enhance flow attachment down the roof of the car.
Got it.
That is not what these are. They look similar, but that is not what they are. Those are actually just a directional change in the flow field there, so that they're just trying to reduce the amount of hot air that is going to be ingested by the engine.
Right.
So you can see in the photo behind me, if you guys put it up on the screen,
Yeah.
the flow coming over the car, it transits over the roof very straight and smooth. And typically we see that flow as it comes down over the back of a car, especially a Porsche. That flow will converge towards the center, and that in this case would draw a lot of the hot air that's coming out of the radiator outlet.
Right.
So they're just creating a small vortex along the top edge, rolling up a vortex, and adding a little bit of directionality and curvature to those strakes to push flow out away from the windows to keep that flow from getting ingested. I'm sure there's still a little bit, but it's not crazy, and it works relatively well.
Right on.
But they're not there to enhance flow attachment to the rear window on this car. What I'm going to talk about next, just so you guys know, is we'll talk about this one, which is the radiator outlet flow.
Kind of the other side of it. Yeah, the outlet flow.
So that flow over the roof of the car, we're trying to control that, and we're also trying to control that outlet flow from the radiators. So this photo here, this screen cap, you can see that flow.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on with the outlet of the radiator that we'll talk about here in just a second, but you can see that there is a definite vortical structure to those flows, and those strakes are helping keep that flow out to the side of the car.
So they're working very well to keep things off of the roof. Just really quickly, what's the physics behind those strakes working that way? Like as far as like the pressure field and things that they're doing, accelerating the flow, or that gist. Is it just a guide, or is there something more nuanced happening?
There's two things happening. It is just a guide. So like, if you hang your hand out the window on the highway like this, and you angle your hand, it's going to push your hand down. So there is some of that, and it's going to push air up, right?
Yep.
So there's a small amount of flow that's just getting directed from the strake, but there's also a vortex that rolls up along the top surface. And so it's kind of hard to describe, but if this is the rear of the car and this side of the car, flow is going to roll up over the top and start this vortice, and that vortex will drag flow down and out. And so that brings flow in and out over the rear window so that you're getting fresh air.
Got it.
It's a very small effect here because the strakes aren't very big, but at 160 miles an hour or whatever this car goes, it's not a small thing. At 100 miles an hour, it's not a small thing.
Sure.
So it's an interesting way to control the flows. We see the use of vortices like that in Formula One cars all the time. We're not seeing it so much in GT cars like in IMSA or anything. Some of the GTP cars are using some of that, but they're a little more regulated. So really, we only see this kind of stuff in Formula One and then here.
Wow.
So
very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, and there's some other flow structure work that they're doing just at the outlet of the radiator. That's perfect. Because those are obviously relatively complicated parts, and it's kind of hard to understand what they're really trying to do there.
Right.
And so it's very similar in that they're trying to create some vertical flow in the outlet here that is drawing that flow outwards, so that by the time it hits the front window, it's going to move out and around the car.
Out and around, sure.
So, and there's those like strakes, those flow conditioners that are there that are helping with that. There's also the actual gurney flap and shape of the leading edge of the outlet,
the very leading edge, pushing it up, and Yep.
and that's sending some flow outwards,
Yep.
and generating a little bit of low pressure on its own to help extraction.
Hmm.
And then just honestly, the placement of the duct, the placement of the outlet. When we have a hood outlet, a radiator outlet in the center of the hood,
Yep.
that flow goes around the side of the car and over the top.
Right.
So that hot air typically has some wing interaction, and then on this car, it would obviously have engine interaction. It would get ingested,
Right.
and so that's not what we want. I don't have any screen captures of the flow through where the inlet used to be on the old car. I just didn't want to do that, but it's flow through. So that inlet in front of the rear fender
Hmm.
connects to a duct, goes up over, and then out. And there's some relatively high flow velocity exiting the outlet right
Interesting.
behind the tire.
Okay.
And so my assumption is, and I want to play with this a little bit more,
Sure.
but
Sure.
my assumption is that they're trying to use that to reduce drag, and it would, in my opinion, reduce drag a little bit. They're filling the dirty air area behind the car.
with
Yeah,
something a little bit more conditioned and
and
lower energy, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
But pretty interesting. There's definitely some more research that I like to do there so we can quantify and qualify that in more concrete terms. But it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just the way Porsche. I mean, this is the first hood vented street car that Porsche has produced, and so
Mhm.
there was obviously a lot for them to tackle in that regard, because hot air going into an engine is bad for performance. For those of you who don't know, as air temperature increases, air density decreases, which means the percentage of oxygen molecules that you can combine with fuel decreases, and that means horsepower goes down. So we don't want to put hot air in an engine ever. We want the coolest air possible to go into an engine so that we can make the most horsepowers for free, right? If we fill it up with hot air from the radiator, well, then you're kind of costing yourself a bunch of power, and that's silly. Don't do that. It's also a quick aside: cold air intakes that are just sitting in an engine bay and not actually ducted to the outside are not cold air. They're hot air intakes. Don't do that. But I digress. That's a different topic for a different day. The fact that Porsche needed to pull air through the front of the car and vent it through the hood is something I feel like we should touch on. So why did Porsche have the need to pull the air out of the radiators through the hood? What's the benefit to that?
So there's a huge benefit to that, in that you are reducing the lift generated. Well, okay, so let's go back.
Yep. Yep.
In a typical Porsche, you have radiators in the center and also in front of the wheel wells.
Mm-hmm.
So the center radiator, that outlets over the top on the GT
Yep.
cars,
Kind of has a
but,
little window and comes up over the hood. Yep.
but the side radiators dump right into the fender wells. So the front wheel wells are already a high pressure area,
Mm-hmm.
and now we're dumping hot, dirty flow into the wheel well that's already high pressure and adding flow there. So that's a big thing that we don't want.
Mm-hmm.
And by ducting all of the flow through one radiator and out the top, you're minimizing the detriment to that. You're also taking flow from the front of the car and getting it over the top, and there is a downforce benefit there too. So it's positive. Every race car on the planet these days basically does something like that.
Right.
And they just brought it to street cars.
Mm-hmm.
So they just did it in a relatively clever way to try to get the flow where they want it to go, so that it's not ingested by the engine. And then also there would be some wing interaction that they've minimized by doing it this way.
Right on. Right on. And for those of you considering a 992 GT3 RS as your track car, just remember that you're going to have to put your helmet in the passenger seat. There is no trunk. It's filled up with a radiator. Hence the picture. All the cool airflow coming out means there's no room in the trunk because it's full. There's no trunk. So really cool technology. Not always very practical to get to the racetrack if you drive your car there, especially if you have a buddy or a wife or a dog that comes with you. It's kind of no. Anyway, very cool tech. Not always the most convenient, but yeah. Also, there is an interesting anecdote with this car. So when we had ours, we went to Smokies, and Justin was riding with me. Smokies is a GT car event on the East Coast. Typically 100, 150 GT cars all come together, and we all drive the speed limit through the Smoky Mountain back roads because it's awesome to drive the speed limit on all these wonderful roads. And that's exactly what we do there. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So Justin's riding shotgun. He's getting video of us going through these beautiful roads, and we roll down the window, and it's like the heater's on full blast.
Yeah.
Because all of that flow that we see in the picture is literally coming inside the car, and it's hot. I mean, it was like 50 degrees out one of the mornings. You put your hand outside and it's like 100 degrees, right? It's like hot coming across your hand, which was, I suppose when you think about it for a second, of course, but it's still a little like, whoa, what the hell? You roll the windows down, you expect cold air to come in. Not in this car. Hot air comes in. So,
yeah.
Interesting experiential point.
Certainly, yeah, that's weird. I mean, it's not weird because it obviously happens and you can see why it happens. It's just funny. You wouldn't think about
that, right? Just like, if you're cold, roll the windows down and put your hands outside. You'll warm up. It's very not normal. So what else is interesting about this car that you found out?
Well, so those are like the little things that are kind of interesting. Obviously, the most interesting part about this car is that they have created a front splitter that is essentially a multi-element splitter. And we've been doing these in Time Attack for a while. There's a lot of people that have been, but to a more aggressive degree. It's really interesting to see how they've done it on a street car. So we've got a multi-element front splitter ducted system, and it really does make the front work quite well. And then obviously the DRS activation of that is very interesting. Also, the rear wing is DRS. Everybody knows that. To me, that's not super interesting because the rear, it's really easy to make a lot of rear downforce with a dual element wing, and it's pretty easy to make our dual element rear wing DRS. So that's a cool thing. But to me, it's not the most interesting part of this car. I think the front end is the most interesting part. And so them giving themselves space to do that by just doing a center top outlet radiator and being really clever with all the flow through that section of the car into the wheel wells, they've made a pretty functional setup. So we can take a look at some of the things there. So the top of this comparison photo is the high downforce setup, and the bottom is the DRS, the low downforce. And you can see very clearly, especially along the front and at the rear wing, the blue is low pressure and red is high pressure, and then there's the gradient in between. You can see how much less pressure or low pressure there is on the front of the car in the high downforce configuration. And that's just due to how they're controlling the flow field under the nose of the car with that multi-element setup that's dumping into the wheel well. When the second element closes and dumps flow out the bottom of the car, I'll show you a screen cap of that here in a second. That raises the pressure under the nose of the car and affects the flow underneath the rest of the car. And it also changes how the flow is even flowing around the front wheel well. So I'll show you this picture here.
So for some of our viewers that don't understand this, we have we offer splitters and we offer wings. for a number of vehicles, 991.1 or 991.2 GT3 RS, GT4 RS, GT4, 992 GT3. There's one thing that we will not sell without the other. And I want Ryan to talk about this for a second. So we will not sell you a splitter without a rear wing. And it's interesting that Porsche ensured that they did not have the same problem by when they included DRS in the wing, they didn't end up with a constant high downforce on the front of the car. They actually released the pressure both front and rear. Please talk to the folks why that's important.
So aero balance is when you're working with a high downforce setup, aero balance and changing aero balance is extremely important. Like you said, we only want to sell wings and splitters together.
Right.
In this case, on the GT3 and on the GT4 RS, that's a package that's designed to function together at a balance that we want.
Correct.
So
something safe
Yeah.
for especially for an average driver. A pro could drive around poor aero balance, something that's really, really front biased, but they probably wouldn't enjoy it, and they'd want to come in and park the car as soon as they can. It'd be a little scary.
It's not fun to drive a really out of balance, aerodynamically out of balance car. So we're shooting for a balanced car, both mechanically and aerodynamically, and those two things should go together.
Right.
And you touched on it. If we only have DRS on the rear, and this thing is making a lot of downforce on the front, the rear would get very light, and that could be very dangerous. So it's similar, even in a static situation where we're selling wings and splitters, the Valkyrie package.
Yep.
That is a package that if you were to put that splitter on a car without that wing to balance it, it would be extremely dangerous. And if you put the wing on the car without the front splitter, you can reduce the angle of attack to get it drivable, but there's always going to be a little bit of aerodynamic understeer. That's safe, but if it's too bad, it can become dangerous as well.
Yeah, and most of our guys that are graduating, most of our clients are we're all amateur drivers because we have a street car that we take to the racetrack. Otherwise, we'd be paid to get in race cars and go win championships and whatnot, and that's not happening for me in my lifetime, and I'm okay with that. The adding a rear wing alone, even alone at low downforce, gives the amateur driver a lot of confidence. It gives them, essentially, it takes an axle of the car out of play, right? The rear is going to be where you want it to be all the time. And as you progress as a driver, you are going to want to add more and more front grip, because that's going to become more and more important to you as your skills progress, as your ability to, as Hans Stuck says, that I learned from Ted, our test pilot, your popo sensor becomes a little bit more advanced. Your ass sensor can feel what's going on in the back of the car. You want to start adding front grip back so that you can make the back end do what you want. Porsche was very conscious of this in their application of DRS.
They definitely were. So we could see it in the pressure profile, the pressure plots before, and you can see it in other ways too. So it's important that they did it in the way that they did, and it makes for a street car that's safe and fast.
Yeah.
So with this screen cap here, since we're talking about the front and the DRS and how that's affecting things, you can see how much just changing the flap angle, the second element on the splitter, really is changing even the flow field in front of the car. You can see that on the top, the high downforce, there is high pressure on the front of the car, and that actually is driving flow underneath the nose, and it's getting picked up and speeding up and getting picked up by that flap flow and generating a lot of low pressure. And low pressure on the car means front downforce.
Yep.
On the setup where the flap is opened up and dumping down, you can see that it's actually allowing more flow through the duct here, and then that gets dumped out the bottom of the car.
Right.
That reduces drag a little bit, and it also means that there's more flow kind of getting dumped in the wheel well, and it just doesn't make as much downforce.
Right.
So we want to see that flow field move in the way that it does there, because that means that we're generating low pressure under the nose, and we're forcing that flow there and generating a lot of downforce. So pretty interesting. You can also see just the wheel well itself, how
much more is coming out from behind the tire. Yeah.
Yep. So it's definitely managing the flow out of the wheel well quite good. You can see there's a vortex off of the little flow conditioner behind the front tire. There's a small vortex that's rolling up there. You can't see any flow coming out of the upper fender louvers, but they do generate some extraction, just not at this level of flow, like where we're actually showing the flow is.
Yeah, where we've got the plane kind of going through the car.
So it's really interesting. They've definitely designed the front to work optimally in the high downforce setup.
Yep.
Makes sense. Even the control arms, which we did model, and they are in there. The control arms are there, and they've stated they make a decent amount of downforce. Here, I would say they make downforce, but it's not a significant amount. It's enough for them to say they make downforce.
Sure.
But really, what they did is they aligned the angles, the profile of the control arms to the flow field that's behind the front tire, because of how that second element is directing.
Interesting. Okay, so they're trying to ensure that flow is organized and finds its way out of the fender.
Yes, and it is extremely organized for this type of setup inside the fender well, and that helps with that extraction coming out. Okay. In fact, with a flow conditioner behind the front tire like this, typically we wouldn't see, I typically don't see fast enough, organized enough flow to generate a vortex of that strength right
off the top of the off of the flow conditioner behind the air curtain, if you will. Ryan came up and got to see the car earlier when we were kind of dissecting it and taking it apart. And so we were having a discussion when he was here. Are these doing anything? Are they for looks? And that just kind of answered the question. They're obviously not for looks. And it was, Ryan was curious about them, but I would say maybe a little bit more on the 50-50 they're doing something, or maybe they're there for looks. He was kind of pointing a little bit lower than 100% thumbs up, but this is why we model things, because it's important to actually go and take a look at them, and this is why we do CFD. So
yeah, there's certainly times where conditioning that flow is important, and there's certainly setups that you can put them in there and it doesn't make a difference at all. So this is definitely the prior. It does make a difference. It is helping reorganize the flow, and it is affecting that downstream flow. Yeah. The rear tire, I don't see anything that one's really truly doing, other than it's just picking up a little bit of the flow that's coming around the rear tire that's already quite dirty, and maybe cleaning it up a teeny bit, but it's very small comparatively.
And that's the one that, we've seen a lot of carbon replacement parts that are being purveyed out into the world, and I'm like, no, those are going to get obliterated by these cars and the gravel they pick up and the sticky tires that they run and all this kind of bit. So I'm not keen on replacing that with beautiful carbon if we can help it, because they're going to last maybe half a track day before they're just skunked. The rear is interesting in that regard. So yeah, maybe that was more of a design element to balance with the front at that point.
There's always going to be a little bit of a looks aspect to it as well. We can't deny that if they're going to do something at the front, they want to balance the looks of it. Yep. Like I said, there's going to be a small benefit. It reminds me of air curtains on cars these days. So air curtains work to reduce a little bit of drag on street cars, on factory cars, but they only work with that very specific tire that the car is delivered with, because that's the right shape, and it's such a small benefit, but they do it because we're trying to make very efficient cars.
Right.
So
right. We had this discussion on the GT3 RS when we were looking at that, and guys want to go to 265 tires. That's not what the car comes with. And as soon as you put a 20 millimeter wider tire than what the car came with, air curtain doesn't do anything, right? You got this tire sticking out. The air is just going right into the tire. So kind of right on.
There are some other things on the front end, as far as there's just a duct that is constantly dumping flow into the front fender well as well, that is also coaxing a lot of that flow through and helping it maintain flow velocity through this area inside the front tire.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I got to do a little more research with it, but it looks like when the second element is in high downforce position, there's quite a lot of flow through that. And it's not choked flow, but it's
approaching choked.
And maybe not. I would say probably not, but it's higher pressure, and it's doing something more than when the second element is opened up in low downforce.
Okay.
A lot of flow is actually getting dumped out below it. So they've done a lot of work with how to manage that flow from the front end of the car through that area into the wheel well, and using it to augment flow underneath the nose of the car, and vice versa. So it's real cool.
Right on. There are turning vanes under the car, and I briefly looked at some of the screen captures, and I can see that there's a dramatic difference both kind of on and off as the car is kind of moving through space.
Well, so definitely. So we can go to the bottom view of the flow lines that we were showing from the top.
Yep.
So you can see the top, that's high downforce. It's dragging flow underneath the side here. If we had these path lines a little bit lower, they would all be going underneath, and they're getting picked up by that flat flow and getting thrown up into the wheel well, and that's driving a lot of low pressure on the nose. You can see it dumping out on the bottom here with the low downforce flap actuated. So it's actually dumping out, and that is changing the way that flow is underneath the car. It's much less organized, and it's not doing the work that it's doing in the high downforce setup.
Right.
So on the bottom of the car, we can show the comparison here. So Porsche uses the Strakes pretty effectively. They're found on all the Cup cars. They're found on all the RSs, and they're on the GT3. They're on the GT4 RS. They are taking flow that's underneath the car and just generating vortices. You can see the low pressure that's generated by that, and the directionality of that flow, and that's just helping the floor generate more downforce. It is removing a lot of the ability of that flow to do something further back, because now we've got quite a bit of dirty airflow into the car.
We've already twisted it up and created low pressure from it, so it's hard to organize it again underneath the car. So
but the diffuser on these cars, because it's a rear engine car, is quite small. So they have obviously made the decision to shift the floor's aero balance a little bit forward using these devices.
Got it. Would you say that any work on the diffuser, and we're probably jumping ahead, but any work on the diffuser would be minimized unless there was work also on the Strakes to allow the diffuser to work more effectively?
We can definitely, the diffuser can work. The diffuser works, and it can work better. But you can see it's not, so like the green is the low pressure, and orange is approximately nominal pressure. It's not really the diffuser's not really doing much. And it is definitely doing more in the high downforce setup than the low downforce setup, but just barely. But it doesn't do much.
Interesting.
Can we
Okay.
can we make it work better? Very likely so. There is still flow that is relatively clean in between the Strakes.
That's coming through the middle in the
Yeah.
in the flat floor. Okay.
Yeah, but it's expanded, and then as it expands, it's going to slow down. So again, it's lower effectiveness at the rear of the car because of that.
Interesting. All right. So there's the Manti full equipment set has a slightly different strake and much longer strakes underneath the car, and a taller set of vanes on the diffuser that they're trying to manage and increase underbody flow. So it's nice sometimes when you get to see the results of another A student's homework before you do your own. They might point you in areas for you to take a look at that you might not have otherwise. Not to say that Ryan wouldn't have gone there anyway, but it does give us some interesting things to kind of pay more attention to, let's say. So
definitely. I forgot I had the screen cap here, so we can,
right on.
We can,
yeah.
We can show that one so that people can see what we're talking about there.
Yeah.
You know, a taller strake there, those curved strakes, that's going to do something. If they're longer, you can see that it's definitely moving flow outward, but it doesn't. It's not like a shooting flow out to the side of the car or something like that.
Sure.
The flow is still staying under the car, and so they're likely trying to move it further out. The Manti kit is trying to do that, or something. We'd have to do some testing, but you know, there might be something clever there that we can pick up on and augment in our own way. So it's on the list of things to check out.
Absolutely. Let's turn our attention to the wing. It's pretty obvious to you what's going on, but to some of our viewers, DRS is new and awesome and whiz bang, and there's this dial and you can make the wing do stuff. What's the stuff that little flap is doing, and are there ways that we could tailor that downforce? Because what some people don't know about this car is, unlike some of the other Porsches, this wing is fixed. It is not able to change its angle of attack. You can't change it. It has a single position, fixed position, and it's either on or off. That's it. It's either on or off. Most of the other wings, even the stock wings from Porsche, all have some ability to tailor their angle of attack. So both the effectiveness of the DRS and the drag reduction and what that does for folks, and then is there an opportunity to offer a variety of setups to folks? You know, we've talked about this. So
yeah, sure. Touching on what we talked about earlier, obviously Porsche was very happy with the balance that they designed into this car, and so they decided to not give anybody the ability to change aero balance. Now, somebody that's relatively clever would still be able to figure out how to change the aero balance by changing front right height, and that's what we do on prototypes. We do that on GT3 cars. That is an effective way to change aero balance. It is going to change some mechanical aspects of the car too, rather than just changing the wing angle. Is quite literally just changing the aero balance.
Sure.
But yeah, it's interesting, and it wouldn't be something that I would stick with. We would definitely want to add adjustability so that you can do a little bit more with the car and tune it to your driving style more.
Right.
So the DRS aspect of that wing, so since it's a dual element, how dual elements function is you have the main element producing most of the downforce. You can see, you could probably put up, Justin, you could probably put up the bottom rear photo just as the single photo for this. so that you can see that the main plane is generating almost all of the downforce that the wing is producing.
Mm-hmm.
So the second element, the flap, is just augmenting the flow field around that wing, and it essentially forces more flow underneath the bottom of that wing profile, speeding it up further, generating more downforce out of that main plane.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yep. There's a lot of nuance there, flap gap, overlap, how that all works, because the flow that is traveling over the top of the main plane and underneath the flap through that slot gap,
Mm-hmm.
it's speeding up, and we use that flow to maintain flow attachment on the flap, and also we can do some other very clever things with it as far as main plane profile design. So it's really easy to make a lot of downforce with a dual element if you do some of those things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about the squeeze between the gap between the main plane and where the second element is, that kind of becomes a nozzle, if you will, and you can start to direct that low pressure, fast flow air to help guide and or pull the rest of the air through the main plane. That's subtle and interesting at the same time.
Yeah, and so you can get that flap flow to enhance the flow under the main plane. You can have a main plane that would not have attached flow if it were not for that flap flow, for that slot gap flow. That slot gap can actually grab onto the flow underneath the main plane and get it to stay attached to the main plane for longer, generating more downforce and better efficiency and things like that.
Yeah.
So
it sounds like there's opportunities for someone who's clever to further enhance the downforce when the DRS is on or off in that case, and then have even more drag reduction when the DRS is disengaged or off. Curious. That's interesting and exciting at the same time. So that's cool.
This wing, when the DRS is open, so this is just an on-off DRS. This is not some sort of variable downforce setup.
Right.
This is just opening the slot gap, just like a Formula One car, so it's on-off.
Yep.
The main plane, when the flap is open, still has fully attached flow on this setup.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Porsche did that on purpose, so that there was less variability.
Yeah, you don't end up coming into a corner and it like pops it open and like woo, back end wants to walk. So
but if you wanted to, you could actually use that to somewhat stall the main plane or get it to separate a little bit. Might cause some extra drag reduction. So there's some interesting things there that they chose not to do, but it's still a very functional way to reduce the downforce and the drag that a wing is generating. This rear wing on this car, when it's in high downforce mode, is quite draggy, and a lot of dual elements with an aggressive flap angle or an aggressive combined angle of attack are draggy. You can think about it as just extra frontal area that the air flowing around the car is going to experience, and so that just adds a lot of drag. So by opening up that slot gap, it's reducing the drag just nominally because of that.
Right.
And other things like the less downforce that it makes, the less drag that it makes, and there's less viscous effects and everything. So
it's interesting. Even Porsche, I think Justin can corroborate this and or fix it. I want to say the top speed on this car was 180 some odd miles an hour, and it was aerodynamically hitting a brick wall. It couldn't go any faster than that, even though some of the previous, like the GT3 RS from that same from the previous era had a much higher top speed, even though it's substantially less downforce. So their DRS is effective, but it's not as effective as to negate all of the other things that are creating drag on the car. So it's still, we'll call it quite draggy compared to some other more slippery cars that produce less downforce than this car. So there are certainly opportunities for creative solutions.
There's a lot of what we call furniture, which is all the extra stuff hanging off the car and all the little flow controls and everything like that.
Yep.
That is all adding drag.
Okay.
It's essentially it's depending on how you want to look at it, it's adding or subtracting energy from the airflow.
Yep.
So it's transferring energy from the car to the airflow, really. And
Okay.
so that is drag. And downforce really is drag too. A lot of people like to think
Sure.
of splitter trays as dragless, and they make free downforce. That's totally not true. It's just more efficient.
Right.
So this car is just draggy compared to the regular GT3 for sure. Even with our Aero package on it,
Yeah.
this car is draggier.
Interesting. That's we'll have a segment. We're not going to spend a lot of time on comparing the 992 GT3 RS and all of its awesomeness to a full Valkyrie packaged car, a 4RS or a 992 GT3 or whatever the case might be. We'll save that for some future installment, but it's certainly something that we want to collaborate, capitalize on, crystallize for the viewers to understand, because everyone in Porschedom understands that this is the king, this is King Kong when it comes to Aero, and maybe there might be others that, are equivalent to or potentially even better. But, we'll leave that for the next nugget that we get to take some of Ryan's time to explain. So we went over the front end, went over the floor, we went over the wing and the DRS comparison and how it's there's still some low pressure that's occurring even when the DRS is up, because Porsche wanted to ensure that people don't die when they're doing 100 miles an hour in the DRS. They hit the button to open the DRS because it is manually operatable with a button on the steering wheel, and it will allow you to override its natural programming. So it'll be interesting as we complete kind of this phase of the investigation and begin to look at what are the areas to attack to improve on the car. Because I would say in most amateurs' hands, this car is already, I would say, generally beyond their reach to explore its limits. But, this is an important but, the things that we do with the car are both to expand its limits and to make it easier for amateurs to get faster and explore the envelope in which the car generates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take a Cessna pilot, put them in an F-16. Are they a great dogfighter? No. But they're going to enjoy that F-16 flight a whole lot more than flying in their Cessna, I'll tell you that much. So the analogy holds, maybe not to the same extent. Somebody already has an RS and the things that we might do to it because it's already very capable. But the things that we plan to do to it will make it even more weaponized and capable. But
the car should be pretty wild. I mean, if you've got one of these cars, maybe hit up Jamie and tell him what you want to see out of it, because we have a lot of ideas.
Yep.
But there's a couple of ways to do this for sure. And, we could turn this thing into an absolute monster.
Yeah.
It already kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it's funny. Ryan and I had a conversation when we were doing the 992 GT3, and I was very cognizant on ensuring the car's aesthetic was not so polarizing as to put people off. Now, there are some that say it is already pretty wild. The GT4 RS, I personally love the look of it. I think it makes it aggressive. It makes it look very purposeful. And when we were talking about the 992 GT3 RS, I was like, Porsche didn't seem to give a shit about making the car too polarizing. So therefore, I would say the gloves are off and let's just make it a monster, because at this point, it's kind of a beast to start with. There's no reason to come at it kind of halfway, in my opinion. So
starting with a Porsche GT car is always starting with a really good platform. This is just this is just a whole extra level
Yeah.
of function that we get to play around with. And,
Right.
you know, so I wouldn't say that we can do anything other than just make it into more of a monster, because it is already that,
Right.
like you said. So, yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. It'll be very interesting to see what we can get out of it.
Yeah. It'll be fun for sure. I mean, that's why we do this stuff. It's, if it wasn't fun, we don't do it. So taking something that $1 billion company and multiple hundreds of engineers have spent many months and or years developing, and dissecting it and tearing it apart and figuring out how to make it better. I mean, that's just what, I mean, it's what Ryan does within the confines of the rule sets when he's out supporting race cars all over the world. And it's what we do when we are attacking and figuring out how to take some of the best cars constructed in the world for their purpose and making them better, right? It's just, it's fun. I don't know. It's intellectually, it makes me tingly in my head. It makes me interested to see what's going on. That's not the whiskey. That's just the, you know, also makes me tingly in my head, but for a different reason. This is just the
like race car ASMR.
Say again.
Yeah.
Right? Sorry.
Like race car ASMR, but for your,
yeah,
you know,
exactly
noise.
Exactly. Any other takeaways from doing the CFD that you want to leave folks with before we wrap up?
Not really. I touched on everything I found was interesting.
Awesome.
There's other little key aspects, like all the standoffs for the flow conditioners are airfoiled.
Right.
They're airfoil filed. Are they doing a ton? I mean, it's so negligible in the sim that I don't know that we could say anything other than that they did it just because they could.
Sure. I mean, it's got to come off the
is,
car somehow. You may as well shape it like a wing. So
yeah,
right. Not having it a block
yep.
of plastic, and you know, it's just there's the subtle things that Porsche does that are effectual, and there are the subtle things that they did that are aesthetic, and they blend them so seamlessly so as to stand in plain view and not shout at you that one is an aerodynamic device and the other is a red herring aesthetic, right? They don't, they do such a great job in that regard. Hats off to them. They did a fantastic job with this car. It really does drive amazingly on track. I will say this, and I'll probably get some hate because of it. As a street car, it's kind of boring unless you're willing to go really absurdly fast.
I agree. It's got to be too fast as a street car, right? Like this is using a lot of aspects that myself and other aerodynamic designers that are doing stuff like this have been doing in time attack and things for a long time.
Right.
And they just did it with this level of polish that's really impressive. But yeah, the car is just, I can see why it would just be boring on the street, because you really couldn't go fast enough to get this to really be exciting.
We might have tried on some public roads in the Georgia suburbs, such that, you know, we had some stains underneath our arms when we got out of the car, the two of us, and it still was to do it again would really be tempting fate. I'll say it that way. And so I like to contain my explorations of speed in that regard to a controlled area, such as a racetrack. I don't like to do these things on the street, but you know, when the curves present to you and you're in the middle of a forest with no one around, okay, we'll give it a 10-second rip and see where we go. Holy bats, the car's very competent, but not something I do on the regular. Not an all the time backroads blast. I'd much rather have a car without all the downforce, something a smaller profile, makes you work for it with a manual transmission. That's gonna be more rewarding at a more sane speed on, we'll call them public roads. This is a weapon for the track, and we're going to attack that package if you will, specifically for that. It will be definitely how to make this one of the fastest track cars that you can drive home and park in your garage. So
it'll be fun. I'm excited.
It will be fun.
Start doing more.
Equivalently excited. So all of you stay tuned. Thank you, Ryan, for this Thursday afternoon. We were supposed to do this tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday. You probably won't see this for a little bit. We've got some things to edit and cut and add some pictures and whatnot. But we will, I would say we'll plan on doing a live, like once we have some more of the parts that we're interested to help people understand and they've had a time to digest this first segment on Whiskey Friday Academy on the baseline of the car.
Definitely. And if any of the viewers have something that we didn't touch on or that they want to see more of, I just did a very, very simple overview comparison so that we could just talk about what this car was doing. But, we could definitely dive down and do whatever you guys want to do.
Yeah. Put it in the comments when you guys see it. Hit us with questions. We're going to do our best. YouTube makes it hard to collaborate on these kinds of things, but we'll certainly have a version of it for Instagram where we are collaborating. So we both Dundon and Zebulon has slightly larger Instagram follower base. So making sure that we get those folks involved in this is important. It'll probably be in the realm of shorts. We'll probably cut it up, the full YouTube video into shorts, more digestible Instagram type attention span segments. But absolutely put your comments in, give us questions when you see this. We're happy to answer them. And we can put them all together and we can do another segment because the very first Whiskey Friday Academy we did on aerodynamics was very, very well received. There's a lot of folks that learned a bunch. I appreciate Ryan's expertise, his knowledge, and his patience with some of my not so educated questions sometimes. But it's always a pleasure having him here with us.
It was fun. I really, we do this for a reason, and it's because it's interesting and it's fun.
Absolutely.
And the last video we did was so cool. I'm not joking when I know I had multiple people in the IMSA paddock grab me and be like, hey, you were in the Dundon aerodynamics video. That was so cool. I learned so much. So I really like doing this stuff.
Yeah.
I like to do this stuff as much as I have time to do it. And if we get to talk about some of the cool stuff that we come up with, that's excellent. If we can answer any more questions that anybody has on some of this stuff that we saw on this car specifically, great. So,
and for those of you who don't have a Porsche, let's say it that way. If you have a Porsche GT car, call us. If you have a BMW, call Ryan. He has parts for you. If you have a Lotus, he has some parts maybe coming soon for that. I don't know if you're under license for that or not. Are you?
You've got
a whole slew of parts that you could help people go faster with, correct?
We do mostly custom. I think that we have done a lot more one-off stuff than many others.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really awesome to get to do something like this where it's going to be a little bit more of a production run, and therefore we get to do a lot more of the work to really polish it off. We're, like I said before, we're working on cars that Porsche has already made to be very good.
Right.
So we want to make sure that these things are going to be very, very good.
That
and
everything works together. That one of the things that we found that I thought was really cool and I didn't get, and we're going to end up, we're segueing to close, but we digress, but it's fine. The thing that I didn't understand is the position of the rear wing is governed in a lot of cases for a passenger car to not go any farther back than the bumper. The actual trailing edge of the bumper has to be the trailing edge of the wing. It can't be any farther back. Now that isn't aerodynamically the best place for the wing. You want that that low pressure flow field, and these are words that I learned from Ryan, so I will parrot them like I know what I'm talking about. Mostly I know what I'm talking about. If you're able to move that back, you get a dramatic effect, even all the way to the front of the car, which was something that I learned from the work that we did on the 992 GT3. And I was like, once you hear it and you see it in the data, it becomes somewhat obvious that if you're improving the low pressure zone entirely behind the car, that you're going to extract more from the underside of the car, and therefore make the front of the car even work more effectively. It was still just like a, oh, that's amazing kind of situation. So the fact that we have all of this furniture already kind of set for this car is super fun. It's going to be super fun what we can try and get out with this thing. So.
No, it'll be good. It'll be good. And you know, it's just a really good car. We're gonna make it better. You know, all that.
Stay tuned. All right, Ryan. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, brother. Thank you for joining with us. And I'll send you a first cut so we can make sure that we get everything right as we get through it.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
All right. Talk to you soon, buddy.
Yeah.
See ya.